Hi, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Attendance Bias. I am Brian Weinstein, your host. This week on Attendance Bias, my guest is Pete Mason, although you probably know him better as PhanArt Pete. Pete is a teacher, an author, and of course, the founder of PhanArt. That's PhanArt with a PH. PhanArt has been an institution on the Phish scene for a while now, as something of a hub or an exchange for artists to display and sell their work. So if you've ever been to a high-profile run of Phish shows, for example, Dick's almost every year, or an MSG holiday run, or maybe the Mohegan Sun shows in 2019, you may have found yourself at a PhanArt show. While these shows are the result of lengthy collaboration, they certainly would not happen without Pete. For today's episode, Pete chose to talk about Phish's show at Starlake Amphitheater in Burgettestown, Pennsylvania on July 29th, 2003. Pete and I go into detail about this, but if you weren't a fan in the 2.0 era, it's really hard to imagine and really hard for us to explain the shockwaves that this setlist, which was full of rarities and bustouts, sent through the fan base at the time. It was a show that simply didn't happen in 2.0, and yet when it did, it blew everybody away, and when you listen to it, you totally understand why. Pete chose this show not only for that reason, but also because he was with his brother and because the playing is superlative. It's absolutely incredible. So enjoy my discussion with Pete Mason about July 29th, 2003 at the Starlake Amphitheater in Burgettstown, Pennsylvania. Pete, thanks so much for joining us and welcome to Attendance Bias. How are you doing today?
Doing great, man. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So we are here to talk about what I think is a show with a pretty high profile, one of what maybe you could call a tentpole show of 2.0 would be July 29th, 2003 at Burgettstown at the Starlake Amphitheater.
Yeah, that show to me was really, it was a huge high point of that summer of 2003 and of all of the 2.0 era. There's only a couple of shows that stand out, and that one for me in Burgettestown is hands down one of my favorites, and I was thrilled to re-listen to it ahead of the show.
Excellent. Yeah, me too. I remember when they first played it and when I first listened to it, and it's been a while since I revisited it. I remember especially when it was played, looking at the set list the next day, and I want to go into this a little bit later, and kind of the shock that I had, and probably a lot of fans had, at the incongruity of the set list compared to what we were used to in 2.0. And I can't wait to get to that. But before we get to July 29th, 2003, let's hear a little bit about yourself. So, Pete, where are you from?
I'm from Albany, New York, grew up in the suburbs, and I've been I went to school in Syracuse and then eventually moved back here, and been enjoying life in the Capital District since. I'm a teacher. I did teach special ed in the Albany area. Published a handful of books, fan art, fan food. Most recently, my children's books. A Well-Traveled Dog was the adventures that my dog Haley went through in life and with me, and then 2 ABC books for Phish and Dead songs, and got a couple more in the works that I'm pretty excited that are going to see the light of day soon, thanks to sitting around during quarantine.
We've all got our projects. This is mine. So,
yep.
Yeah. So growing up in the Albany area, how did Phish first enter your life? Do you remember?
Yeah, my neighbor across the street, Sarah, I was in 8th grade, and so she would have been in 6th, and there was a handful of us in the neighborhood over there one night, and her friend put on this weird white CD, Junta, and we listened to that, and I vaguely remember Esther sounding just creepy as hell.
Still does.
And Golgi, I was like, are they really singing about what I learned about in life science? And then Contact was the one that really stuck out. That and Dinner and a Movie. Anything where that has just repetitive lyrics, I was probably going to fall into. And then I just pretty much ignored it. So I know I ignored Phish more or less from 90 to 95. It wasn't my thing. I loved grunge. I focused on that. Then I got to Syracuse and quite a few.
When did you get to Syracuse? How old were you now that we're in Syracuse?
I turned 18 the semester I got to Syracuse.
Okay.
You know, some people were Phish fans. And then there was a bar that we all went to for live music called Hungry Charlie's, or Chuck's. And there were Dead cover bands on Mondays. There was the occasional Phish cover band. One band was from Long Island called The Flow.
PHLOW?
No.
Okay.
FLOW. I'm looking that way because there's a poster from that night when Fishman was in town, and he was buddies with the manager, and he came in and he ended up playing drums with them.
Oh, fun.
So it started to like seep in, and you know, I listened to plenty of random Phish here and there, and I heard Sparkle on Dr. Demento, but I never wanted to get into it. And then a friend of mine gave me a live one and Hoist, and started checking it out. And my first show was in my hometown on December 13th, 1997. And that was one of my, you know, groundbreaking concert experiences, even though I didn't fully get it until a couple of years later.
My setlist memory, Farmer's Almanac memory is failing me right now. So where was that show?
That was at the Knickerbocker Arena, well, the Pepsi Arena in Albany.
Right, okay.
It starts out with a really long Yamar to open up the show. There's a sample in a jar in the first set. I love that. Good Times, Bad Times to close it. And then I didn't know anything else, but that second set has just a huge Mike song with the Bring the Dude goofing around. And I remember the place just deafeningly loud, and I didn't know why. Like they were supposed to bring this dude out, and I didn't know what was happening. That show I saw there was like Aerosmith 3 years before, and
oh wow,
and Nine Inch Nails before that. I'm like, what's going to happen here? And you know, we got a sweet encore. I think they shut the lights off during Hood. It was a pretty awesome show, but it took until about a year later where I started really getting into collecting tapes, and then the next year after Oswego, I was just sold and hooked on this band. I wanted to listen to everything and started trading tapes and going to everything.
And so you've really dug in since the late 90s. And a lot of people who are listening to this probably know you better as PhanArt, Pete. Right? And on your website, phanart.net, that's PHANART as one word, it says that you began PhanArt shortly after Phish's final shows in 2004 as a way to help preserve the legacy of Phish's community. So after Coventry, how long after that festival did the idea of PhanArt come to you?
On the drive home.
Yeah, was that instantaneous?
I can tell you, we left Coventry. I just remember we got hammered on Sunday night at the show, like everyone, and we just kind of all went to bed quietly the next morning, and then people slowly were leaving, and you kind of realized like you weren't going to see some people for a while.
Mm-hmm.
Just like we're not seeing some certain people we wouldn't see otherwise without Phish touring. So every time, you know, when people started to like get ready to mosey and shuffle and get back to life, they were you know, everybody was making sure to say goodbyes and lend a hand and clean up around your area. We got in the car about 5, I think. And then started driving down I-91. And just as it started to get dark, I was listening to, what's that show that had Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew?
Oh, The Man Show? No, not The Man Show.
No.
Love Lines?
Love Line. So there's not much, we're in Vermont, there's not much, there's not many radio stations where I ended up listening to Love Line for like 20 minutes, and I can't say that it was any inspiration, but I kind of shut it off. Well, I guess it inspired me. I shut it off and just drove quietly for a little while my friends were asleep in the car, and I just started thinking about what was going to be missed and, you know, just reminiscing already about stuff.
And the idea that I had in mind was like, man, I'm going to miss all those shirts and stickers and posters that I was just becoming aware of. I found out about a lot of the early fan art scene, not from really the lots, because I didn't really hang out on the lots or anything. And there was a lot more dead stuff, not lightning bolts and bears dead stuff, but just selling like hemp stuff and perfumes and patchwork shorts and dresses for girls. I didn't really see like anybody with a stand with a bunch of T-shirts on it as we do these days.
Right.
I wasn't really looking for it, but so that doesn't mean it wasn't there, but not like we see today. So we're staying at this Best Western, and the second day we woke up for breakfast and walk out of breakfast, and there's a small little art show there. At least Phish artists. And there were maybe 10, and among them were Isadora Bullock, AJ Mastay, Ryan Kerrigan, Jason Lees, I'm pretty sure was in this, and a handful of Jason Kazarowski, a handful of others that were on the fishposters.com message boards. And they started this little show, and there was another one December 30th, 2003 in Miami. That one I knew about ahead of time because I was starting to get tapped in and wanted to know what I wanted to buy and spend or invest money in. They didn't have another one until Hampton 03, at which point I was exhibiting at the show, selling the fan art book and helping raise money for Mockingbird. I had gotten into it only recently, and I basically took the Coventry breakup time to look back and be like, all right, well, let's start this project and just try and find everything I can. And 2004 internet is not the same as 2014 internet. So it was a process to search through message boards, through deep Google searches and eBay searches, and contacting people who may not use their email or fallen off the face of the earth to ask them for their contributions to the book, and also sell them on the idea, hey, we're going to make a book for charity and put all this stuff together.
And was it as arduous as that? Like, to get the whole idea, the whole entity of fan art started was to just kind of throw as many feelers as you could out and keep them, because that sounds like a really hard task to accomplish.
At the time it started out with, identifying a list of artists I wanted to reach out to, artists that I knew. And I knew zero artists at this point. I didn't have an artist who was like guiding me. I mean, some like Ryan Kerrigan, Jason Kazarowski, and some others were very helpful in saying, oh, hey, you should talk to this person, this person, this person. And that did help. And it's how I started to reach out to quite a few folks that just, aren't doing anything now. They did something in like 99, 2000, and it was still fresh to contact them. I got as many as I could, had a little legal something drawn up, just saying I'm going to use this just for the book, and this is your protection and mine. And everybody was on board for this. It was great. And it just took a long time. I stopped the process of collecting all the stuff and reaching out to people somewhere in the summer of 2008. So I went about 4 years of just collecting and collecting and collecting. And then I laid the book out in the fall of 2008. Had it finalized just as I was going back to school, going back to teaching. And we published it in February 2009, just before Phish came back.
What do you remember about the first fan art show?
So the first fan art show was November 2nd, 2013 in Atlantic City. And what I remember about that is that I put that whole thing together in a month. And I had never done that before. I'd never done anything like this before. I was kind of I was put in a position that I didn't want to shy away from, and I'm certainly glad I didn't. And it was that there were a couple of folks that summer, and including Kara Mastay, AJ's wife, who we had planned. We planned a summer show in Saratoga, but the other three folks just they were not available for November 2nd or anything. Nobody was going to be there except for me, and I only at that time for the shows that we were putting together that preceded the fan art shows, which very much looked very similar to just not as well attended. They were like, well, we shouldn't do one. And I was like, guys, I have a lot of artists that are reaching out to me saying they need something. They won't go if they can't vend. They have tickets. They have hotel, but they're looking forward to this. We can't let them down. And I was told, by one of the three people on the call, I was told, don't do it. You're not going to make it happen. And the other two were supportive. Is probably the best, most accurate word, because they basically said, go for it. Just go for it. Here's what you need to look out for. And that day I called up Caesars and said, and Bally's and some others, and got prices, and Caesars got back to me, and we had the first show there, and it took me 30 days almost exactly before I arrived. I had to figure out, I figured a lot of stuff out over the course of a few shows, but that first one, I'm glad my friend Karen was there, because she played music all day.
You need it.
And if it wasn't for her sitting there, it would have just been a lot of talking and conversations. There was the Fantiques Roadshow.
That sounds great.
It was great. Jason Wigman and Jesse had the Taper 420 had this show, and they basically brought it to the corner of the shop. People brought stuff in, and they quote unquote appraised stuff, and it was hilarious. I couldn't really take part in it because I'm running the show. We had a successful event, and I remember when it was all said and done, I had cut the expenses down from what they normally were. I had profited $100 off the entire show.
Rich man.
And for not knowing how some of the other shows had been, to profit even just that little bit was like, all right. So I bought drinks that night, and then all of a sudden when Phish Tour was announced, I was like, let's try this again. We'll do it at Congress Plaza.
You must have felt amazing when it actually came off.
Oh, I felt great. I after the show, I remember going down to see Particle at some club and getting back to the hotel room, and I just was like, that was incredible. And I never had any experience planning anything like that or putting it together. And all I did was just reach out to certain vendors, and some folks reached out to me, and we just set up the price and got everybody paid in advance, and it was a go. So the next one was better, and the next one after that, and it really was a start. I do remember looking around the room that day and just marveling that people were enjoying it.
Before we get into this specific show at Burgettstown, let's take a look at Phish in 2003 overall. Phish played 45 shows in 2003, which consisted of a quote-unquote reverse New Year's Eve run, with the New Year's as the first show of the four, and then Hampton after that. A very highly regarded winter tour that took up about half of February, a summer tour that filled almost the whole month of July. It concluded with the IT Festival. And then in the fall, they played a short 4-show 20th anniversary tour that had just 4 shows along the Northeast Corridor over Thanksgiving weekend. And they closed the year with a 4-night New Year's run in Miami. Some of the higher profiles show from the year were the New Year's Eve show with a weird Tom Hanks inspired New Year's Eve gag. The February 28th show at the Nassau Coliseum with the return of Destiny Unbound and an all-time tweezer, the IT Festival. And the 20th anniversary tour that, even if it was not very notable musically speaking, it featured guests from the band's history like Tom Marshall, the Dude of Life, and Jeff Holdsworth even.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, I was in between my junior and senior year of college. I attended as many shows as I possibly could. I only saw Cincinnati in February, but I went to a few shows that summer, including it, and the Nassau and Philly shows on the 20th anniversary tour. So where were you in 2003 leading up to this show?
I was all over the place. I had graduated from Syracuse in August 2002. Still living up there. Took a first stab at grad school, and was bartending and getting to that point of what am I doing? Where am I going to go? Like, I had finally graduated, and I eventually, bowed to the mental pressure of let's just get the hell out of Syracuse. So around the first week of June, I ended up moving down to Florida with my brother, and we're there for just a few weeks, got our apartment situated, and moved in. And then, oh, look at the time, Phish tour is coming to Atlanta in a couple days. So we were going to drive back up and go to it. I wasn't going to miss that, but I had my brother, and he didn't have a job just yet, so we just said, screw it, let's go. And we took my dog Haley and drove up to Atlanta, saw the show there on the 26th, drove up to Sumter, South Carolina, where my aunt and uncle lived at the time. And then the next day on the 28th, drove straight through and overnight to Burgettstown. And stayed there that night with my friend Sam, and then planned to go to the show the next morning. And we were thrilled about it. And I brought Haley to the Atlanta show. She stayed in the car with the windows cracked, and everything was good. Same with Burgettstown, where my friend had a Jeep with the plastic doors that you put on it. He was content laying in the back of that the whole day, and in the night she was chill. So.
That's so sweet. Getting into the first set of this show, I mentioned it earlier, but when the show was played, I remember just seeing the set list on Phish.net the next day, and it's hard not to remember, but it's hard to kind of understand if you weren't there, to understand the context of what it felt like to see this set list when in 2003 and 2004, I think the band played a lot of similar shows on paper, and this just had so many rarities and songs that seemed to just come out of left field and things that you wouldn't expect them to play. And it just, without even hearing it yet, it looked like a show you would be sorry to miss.
No, you're right. Like there were people who the next day were like, pissed that they weren't there, or that you were there and they weren't there, or that they had a ticket and they didn't go, or they thought about going. If you look at the tour routing, it was I think it was Raleigh, Atlanta, Charlotte, or Charlotte, Atlanta, Raleigh. So we go from North Carolina. What are you gonna do? Go to Burgettstown or go to Camden?
Right.
And then go. Like you can just take 95 the whole way and skip one show. It's one of their only Midwest shows that tour, I'm guessing. I'm sure there was Deer Creek, but you're going to give everybody a last chance from Cleveland and Pittsburgh to go check it out. So it didn't feel underattended, but I also don't really remember it being. I don't really remember the crowd very much because I was just so caught up in the music and so caught up in what was unfolding and watching the stage or the screens that were giving us close-ups when we got to the Harpua.
First three songs in the set were Daniel Saw the Stone, which was the first one since 1997, which was 285 shows. So that's the opener. And then they played Camel Walk and Got a Jaboo.
Yeah, and Camel Walk was rare. Like,
yeah, it was.
I think we get it a lot in 3.0 comparatively. It was even when they played at Darien Lake, I think it was the third one since the late 80s when they played Darien Lake in 97. So, yeah, we were out of the gate. You're getting Daniel Saw the Stone that nobody knew, but I knew it as a religious song because I loved that there were a couple of those all throughout, peppered in Paul and Silas as references.
Yeah.
And then Camel Walk, whoa. And that's when people were like, oh, what's up? And a big Jaboo, it's like 10 minutes, I think.
Yeah, actually, it's about 9 or 10 minutes. And not only the length, but it was extremely fluid. Yeah. Like, it's a really good jam.
Really good type 1 jam. You don't get early on at that time. The show we saw a couple days before was a straightforward heater, but the first set was just the first set. This was a little special getting a Jaboo that goes that far.
I usually, when I hear in 2020, when I think about 2.0 as like a solid entity, I usually picture those long dissonant jams that I think were more popular or more common in 2004 as compared to 2003. So that when I heard this Jaboo in preparation for this recording, I was like, oh, wow, they really played with an energy and a focus that I kind of forgot about. And Jaboo is excellent. There's about 8 minutes. There's this like great guitar lead. Fishman gets in on the fun about 45 seconds later. Cheer after Jaboo. I wrote in my notes, the crowd knows that the band is on and that they're in for something special.
Yeah. I remember the cheer after that Jaboo. It was like, all right, we all know this one, and you jammed it well. What do you have up your sleeve? Yeah. And I think it was the second ever Cool It Down that was dropped after that. And
third time. It was the third one.
The third version of a song, not that they debuted 5 years prior. And you don't have your phone to check this out. You can't just look it up. There's no internet there's an internet, but there's nothing on your phones. So you had to like just talk to some nerd or ask about it. I think we all figured out it was Cool It Down, and somebody might have said, oh, it's Velvet Underground. Okay. And that stood out pretty significantly. That was
even with it, there's a part in the middle of Cool It Down where Trey kind of like slow down, speed up jams in the middle. You know, it's not a full improvisation.
And then he slows them down a little bit, and then they go, and it builds up again.
It's one of their best tricks where it's almost like when you unplug a machine and you hear it power down, and then you plug it right back in. It's kind of got that weird back and forth. Next, they play Scent of a Mule, which I absolutely loved.
This is the longest jam of the set, too, right?
I think so. Either that or Timber Ho, which came 2 songs after. I don't have the timings in front of me, but Scent of a Mule, it's extremely notable because in the middle, we're used to Page just doing his crazy, his craziness in the middle with his banging on the piano, and then the Trey and Page mule duel. But for this one, there was like a whole band melody.
Yep. There was a whole extra element to this one, and it stands out a little different than than your typical mules today or even then.
Yeah, it stands out for any era. And Phish.net has it listed as Wouldn't It Be Loverly by Julie Andrews from My Fair Lady. And I'm into musical theater. I never would have picked that out in 100 years.
Yeah, I mean, that's Trey pulling deep into his Broadway catalog to see what he can tease.
And so then Fee comes next, which is very straightforward.
That was the bust out of the first set that I was so in love with. Because you were chasing it at that time. That Fee seemed to be a little harder to get. and you wanted to see him. I mean, it's the first song on the first album, so everybody kind of knows it.
It is a lot of fans' like first favorite Phish song. You know, it just seems like a lot of people grab onto that almost immediately when they're getting into the band. And after Fee, they go into what I thought was the highlight of the set improvisationally was Timber Ho.
I didn't know Timber Ho too well. I know it was my first time seeing it, but I feel like that was one of those, I never listened to this before on tapes or something, just maybe hadn't come across it. So it was newish to me. And I'm pretty certain this is the time in the first set where I left to go to the bathroom and get a beer, because it was hard to pick that point looking at this set.
Yeah.
Like, when do you step out for a moment?
I felt the same way during jam night at the Baker's Dozen. Like I remember I had to go to the bathroom during Cross-Eyed and Painless. It was song number 2, and we were already like 40 minutes into the set. And I'm like, I'm just going to have to sit here and explode. Like there's no time to go. And but Timber Ho, this is kind of closer to what I imagine when I hear 2.0. They kind of alternated smoothness and feedback and dissonance. This had a lot. I thought it went a lot of places, this Timber Ho. And the come down was when the circus comes to town, which is always a sweet treat to hear. And McGrupp, which I think probably sent shockwaves through the crowd.
C and then probably McGrupp are the holy shit first time hearing it for me. And I remember getting back during the circus and hearing the end of it and you know, explain to my brother, so this is from the guys that did La Bamba, and kind of educating him on that, because this was probably his, I don't know, 7th show or so, and he'd only started in '99, but we we listened to that, and then McGrupp came out, and I just focused on that one, sang the words I knew, and reveled, and I was like, holy shit, I'm getting a McGrupp. These are rare.
Yeah, I think this is a recurring theme for us, but I think it's easy to forget the context in which this show was played. At the time, you know, there were so many rarities, but especially Gamehenge songs, aside from maybe Wilson or AC/DC Bag, I think Gamehenge as a whole kind of took a back seat during 2.0.
Yep.
And for something like McGrupp, which is one of the lesser played or even lesser known songs at the time, that must have washed all over the crowd.
Yeah, I think Possum might have been the only song that really stayed in heavy rotation among Gamehenge songs. But they, McGrupp and Tila,
Punch You in the Eye.
A while, Punch. You get some, but it seemed like they were escaping that and moving away from playing those songs. So to get a McGrupp was like, holy crap. And then didn't they punctuate they end the set with Golgi, right? Yeah, they do.
And what I noticed by the end of this set is there were no 2.0 songs played during the whole set.
We were all kind of realizing like they haven't played anything new. I think the Jaboo was the only newish song, and that was 4 years old by Phish. So that's telling you something. There's another show, Hartford 2009. After the first set, we realized, wow, I think the newest song in this, it was something from the 90s, and eventually when the show was over, the newest song was Piper.
Wow, I was at that show,
Yeah.
and I never made that connection. For me, all the again the Gamehenge stuff, and also was it Ghost into Psycho Killer? That
Yeah,
night,
I listened to that the other day. Ghost, Psycho Killer, Catapult.
Iculus. And that, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
whole nother episode of this show. I could talk about that show forever. But yeah, Golgi Apparatus closed the set, and that's, as old school as Camel Walk was in the beginning of it. And now we're back for set two that opens with Cross-Eyed and Painless, and what a version this is.
Yeah, 24, 25 minutes long.
Yeah.
And this is, if you listen to a 20, 25-minute version of Cross-Eyed Painless from later in 3.0 in the last 4 or 5 years, you'd expect one type of version to go, one thing to happen in that 20 to 25 minutes. This is completely different, and it's just full of energy and just, following the bouncing ball of where the jam goes. There's not a dull moment in this. It eventually ends with some bliss, but this Cross-Eyed, when it started the set, I mean, when the lights went down and we were sitting, for reference, we were sitting in the pavilion pretty much straight to the back, in one of the last few rows of seats. So we had great vantage point, a lot of room. I remember there not being a ton of seats taken up around us until the second set started and people stubbed themselves down. But when we were there and you just heard the cymbal crash to start it, it was off, and it was like, oh boy, let's see up. It was something. It was to come out with that type of a first set. Now I'd think oh, well, geez, they're going to come out flying the second set. At the time, I don't know how many shows I'd been to by that point, probably somewhere in the 30s. I hadn't gotten to the point of being well, the first set was that good. The second set has to be even better, or they're into something here. What are they going to come up with? Nobody. I mean, we knew what iPods were from media, but we didn't know that the band had gotten them the day before.
Yeah, was that? I've heard that rumor, and I don't know if it's ever been confirmed.
There was a Rolling Stone article about this.
Okay.
And I remember, I haven't looked it up, but I remember reading it, and it came out a couple days after, maybe even prior to it, and it was basically, how did they, dig so deep for their big show at Burgettestown their fans were talking about. And the band got iPods loaded with every song they'd ever played. So they basically started scrolling through them and finding all these songs they wanted to play. But there were a couple of others that hadn't been done in a while. And those were, that had a little something to do with it. Getting that Cross-Eyed, that was, that song is never dull.
And it never dulled. And something I noticed today when listening to it is it keeps up the Cross-Eyed and Painless tempo throughout the whole jam. The whole jam. It's 25 minutes. If you could picture in your head right now how fast the band plays Cross-Eyed, even today in 2020 or 2019, I guess, imagine that for 25 minutes, and it never slows down. The rest of the band kind of switches around, where Paige goes from the organ to the piano, and about halfway through, there's this amazing bliss chord progression from Trey. It almost sounds like a brand new song. And Fishman is very concentrated on the wood blocks. They go all over the place. They visit an entire universe, as far as I'm concerned, of sound.
They really do. If you can enjoy and praise the Cross-Eyed from Jam Night of Baker's, then you absolutely owe it to yourself to listen to this and then say to yourselves, whoa, they were capable of this back, like on a random given night. Yeah, they didn't need to plan it out. Like, we've had wonderful cross-eyes in the past decade.
Sure.
But that one is an all-time great.
So after Cross-Eyed and Painless, they settled down into Thunderhead.
That was pretty sweet. There was, I think, the only new song that night. Yeah, that was the only new
I
song.
think you're right. I think you're right.
That Farmhouse and Jaboo are the only like recent songs that showed up that night of anything. If I want to scratch my head a little more, you go back, and I think the next early song goes back to Mule on Hoist. Like it's a show that's got very little stuff from the era.
Right. I mean, Bittersweet Motel was only a year or two old.
No,
all right. 97, I think that debuted.
Oh yeah, 97. Yeah, okay, that's right. That was in the, that's in the Harpua.
Yeah, but Thunderhead has only been played 6 times ever, and they were all in 2003.
Yep. Yeah, if Trey would relearn the lyrics, I think we'd all be blessed with that. And I know that some of the reasons they don't play songs are like, well, we don't want to just play it. We want to practice it and nail it. And I'd rather that too, but just got to get that bug in his ear for, hey, Thunderhead, it's a pretty good one. Still holds up.
Was it as well received at the time? Because now when they play stuff like All of These Dreams, for example, I remember people chatting like crazy and going to the bathroom in 2003 during All of These Dreams. What was the vibe like for Thunderhead, if you remember?
Oh, I do remember. I went to the bathroom. I don't think I left right away, but I kind of saw it as like, I got to get another beer. I got to go to the bathroom. I'll run off and do that. I left with my brother from where we were all sitting with a group of friends, and let's get a beer and go to the bathroom. And I lost track of him in the span of this Thunderhead, like about 6 or 7 minutes. So I just walked right back to the seats, beer in hand, and just as Thunderhead's ending, and I love Thunderhead, but after that Cross-Eyed, and pretty sure we just sat around all separate chilling. I needed to, take a break.
Sure.
But as soon as that Thunderhead is over, the first thing you hear is the drum beats that lead into Brother.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. The first time I heard Brother live was at Burgettestown, and I knew it, and I knew of it from, Ben and Jerry sitting in at Clifford Ball,
right.
and I just love the lyrics. I started walking back to the back edge of the pavilion, and they start doing the drum beats, and I see my brother, and I just kind of like freak out. And I'm like, oh my God, not only do I get to finally see Brother, I'm seeing Brother with my brother at this groundbreaking show, and what else is going to come out of this?
Well, if you're asking what else is going to come out of this, look what comes next.
Yeah, so the Brother was pretty sick, and it might have been my brother. It might have been Chris's first time even hearing it, but he got, oh, well, that's cool, and still one of those things I talk about. And then there's when I re-listen to the show, there's like an extra, like a minute or so of silence at the end of the track, and you're like, what's going on here? And then you realize they're queuing themselves up for that Harpua they discussed backstage.
Yeah, and this is, I think, the only Harpua of 2.0, and it would be the last one until the summer of 2009 at SPAC, when Fishman sings I Kissed a Girl by Katy Perry.
Yep.
So
what was the last Harpua before this? Was it?
I don't think there were any in 2.0 other than this one. I mean, and
like 2000 or 99.
Or in 99. I do a fact check at the end of every episode. So I'm gonna look this up. I'm writing it down now.
I looked at it the other day, and I figured there's something since. Didn't they do a Harpua for one of those New Year's runs at MSG?
In 97, they did Harpua on 12/30/97, which was the Utter Ball, and Tom Marshall came out for I'm Gonna Be 500 Miles, the song by the Proclaimers.
Oh yeah, okay. So 97. It feels.
There's got to be one in between there, right?
Yeah.
So they start with the narration where Jimmy is searching for it. he's got everything but it, says Trey. And then they played Bittersweet Motel, which is an obvious call considering the location, right? And then back into Harpua, and then I fooled around and fell in love, which is what?
As soon as he started singing it, I was like, oh my God, this is Elvin Bishop. This is amazing. I knew the song. I knew every bit of it. And I'm like, this is a trip. And I didn't know the history of the band members individually or how they were. And I guess this was around the time that Fishman had met Breyer and was settling down, I guess. And I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. And he references, have a girl, a couple other girls, maybe a boy. And when I re-listened to this and I thought back, I'm like, doesn't he have a few girls and a boy? How does
he does. He has 5 kids, yeah.
Yeah, and only one. I think he has the only boy in the band, and among all the band kids, he predicted his lineage going into the future.
Yeah, on stage in front of everybody.
Yeah, that was great. Jimmy knows his stuff. Yeah, the Bittersweet Motel was cool. There's a big cheer for Pittsburgh.
Sure.
And then they go back into Harpua, and and Trey says, Jimmy looks like this guy, and it's Fishman on his shirt. Then there were some stickers that summer, and they're in the PhanArt book that say, vote for Fishman. Fishman is Jimmy, or something like that. There was one we didn't put in that's something like I slept with Jimmy or I slept with Fishman because that's unnecessary. But there's that summer, there was like a summer of Jimmy. So I think there might have been some inspiration that goes even beyond that.
That would make a lot of sense. I never made that connection that if that's when Fishman met his wife, that's what would have led to this. At the time, I didn't know anything about anything regarding that.
I was pretty much surprised at, the fact that we're getting this Harpua and they keep going back and forth into it, which was on every Phish tape that had segues back into the same song multiple times. That intrigued me the most. Like, what are you doing? Nobody.
Yeah. I'm a sucker for that stuff.
Yeah. And I came from a grunge background in high school, and like hell, that would ever happen at a grunge show or any grunge artist.
Right.
This was unique, and a lot of other bands do it now. So yeah, the Fooled Around and Fell in Love was pretty sweet. And back in the end of Harpua.
And then they closed the set with David Bowie,
which I re-listened to again recently, and that's got some fire to it. It's not your basic in and out Bowie. And fun fact, this show, if you were burning it to CDs back in the first decade of the century, it would fit on 2 CDs only if you cut off Farmhouse. So I never listened to that Farmhouse again until you compelled me to listen to it.
Okay.
That show, because you're not going to waste a disc on a single song, and why put the filler on? Yeah, I have that. I had that. I re-listened to it. It's actually a killer Farmhouse for back then. It's
it has a very soulful solo at the end.
Yeah, he takes his time, and it's a pretty good, tuck you into bed after 2 sets of all that. I remember just being like, oh, okay, this is cool, and we all liked Farmhouse at the time, and all the girls are swooning. So
sure, and it's all gravy by that point anyway. I feel like the Harpua segment at the end, before Harpua, it was a great show. But when you do Harpua, which is really the holy grail of this era, because it was only played once, we've already talked about all the rarities played in this show anyway. That's that's the ultimate. And that really elevates it, I think, from a great show to a we'll never forget this kind of show.
Yeah, the Harpua stands out as the thing where you're excited you got it, or you're pissed you missed it, and there's no in between. If you were able to go to that show and a Phish fan who was capable at the time and you didn't go, you were pissed. But if you went, you were happy about it.
Pete, thank you so much for joining me. This was a real pleasure. This show, emblematic of 2.0, especially of 2003. At the time, it seemed like a set list from outer space. Now it's just an amazing show to listen back to. Thank you so much for choosing it. Thank you for being here. Where can people find information about PhanArt?
They can follow me on social media, PhanArt with a PH. PhanArt.net has a great amount of art that fans have made over the years. If you're looking for a Phish-inspired mask, quite a few of those up there now. But all the details on anything PhanArt related will pop up there. If you're a vendor or an artist and you're looking to get your art out to a wider audience, that's the original concept of PhanArt. It was to, before it was easy to sell stuff on social media, it was, hey, let's put it up there and promote you as an artist. And that's what we're still doing. We're working on a virtual PhanArt show. We'll have some details on that very soon. And that's going to be something that'll bring everybody together in one great place. And then from there, we're going to, fingers crossed, we're back next year. We're going to, have something really wonderful to build onto with all the artists and creators and everybody who's making fan goods and really celebrating these small businesses that come from our scene and have the inspiration behind them that we all love so much.
Thank you so much for doing that and doing what you do. Good luck in the new school year. And we'll look forward to the virtual PhanArt shows soon. Pete, take care.
Thanks, man.
And there you have it, my conversation with Pete Mason, or PhanArt Pete, about the show at Burgettstown, Pennsylvania on July 29th, 2003. And since we went all around and really tried to get our facts straight, we still made some mistakes. So let's take a look at today's attendance bias fact checks. First of all, throughout the episode, I incorrectly pronounced the name of the town as Burgettstown, while Pete accurately calls it Burgettestown, with a hard G. I've been pronouncing it wrong for well over a decade, but goes to show it's never too late to learn. When explaining the tour route, Pete lists Raleigh, Atlanta, and Charlotte, but he isn't quite sure which way the tour actually went. From July 25th to 27th, 2003, Phish crisscrossed from Charlotte, then back to Atlanta, and ended up with that 3-show run in Raleigh. So Pete's second guess was correct. He also guesses that Burgettestown was Phish's only Midwest show that year. He offhandedly guesses that they also played Deer Creek. They did play 3 nights at Deer Creek, but Phish also played 2 nights at Alpine Valley and, depending on your definition of the Midwest, 1 show in Bonner Springs, Kansas. Pete mentions a crazy stat that Camel Walk at Darien Lake 1997 was the 3rd performance of the song since the late 80s. He must have been holding on to that since the late 80s, because he was absolutely right. The band played Camel Walk at the Front in Burlington in 1989. That's how far back we're going. And then it took a 6-year break before returning at the Sugarbush Summer Stage in Vermont in July 1995. It was played once again in 1997 in Germany before appearing at that Darien Lake show in question. That is an incredible job by Pete. Pete also asks if Scent of a Mule is the longest jam of the first set. During the conversation, I thought that Timber Ho was the longest jam, but Pete was again correct. Scent of a Mule's time is 10 minutes and 29 seconds, whereas Timber Ho lasted for 7 minutes and 47 seconds. Of course, the improvisation, the jams of each song are different times than that, and one may be longer than the other, but for the sake of this fact check, I'm going to stick with Scent of a Mule. Toward the end, there is a lot of discussion about Harpua. I guessed that this is the only performance of Harpua in the 2.0 era, and I was right about that. When trying to figure out when the last Harpua was played before this show, the actual answer is the incredible version on November 2nd, 1998 in Salt Lake City, where Phish played all of Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon within Harpua, to quote-unquote punish the fans who decided to skip the show in favor of an easier drive from Las Vegas to Denver. Thanks again to PhanArt Pete for joining me today on Attendance Bias, and thank you for listening as always. If you enjoy the show, please subscribe, like, rate, and review Attendance Bias wherever you get your podcasts. Take care, everybody, and I hope to see you next week.